afternoon. It's Monday, the 6th of April 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us northern exposure from north of the border.
Let's get on with the usual statistics here. Global cases of COVID-19 up to 1.285 million. Global deaths up to 70,344. And recoveries up to 271,847. And then active cases 943,070. Mild cases 897,076. And serious cases 45,994. So, of course, one of the active cases that has been announced is Boris Johnson. He said that he still has one of the symptoms. And the official statement said, on the advice of his doctor, the Prime Minister has been admitted to hospital for tests. This is a precautionary step as the Prime Minister continues to have persistent symptoms of coronavirus 10 days after testing positive for the virus. The Prime Minister thanks NHS staff and so on. So why is Dominic Raab on the screen? Well, of course, he is the first Secretary of State. And so if Boris ends up in hospital for a longer period of time, Dominic Raab will take over in the meantime.
Yes. So there's no do not resuscitate on Boris.
Well, that's not been defined just yet. No. It's not clear. Well, let's move on to statistics. And here's an interesting post on the World Economic Forum website from Nina Schwab, who's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Principal Visiting Fellow at the United Nations University International Institute for Global Health. And really what she's highlighting is a lack of adequate testing, which means, she says, many of those who've been infected with the coronavirus will not appear in the official statistics. And that, of course, suggests that many estimates for its mortality rate are much too high. So she's arguing for a better system of sharing and reporting data. And she's produced a useful graph showing the amount of testing that's going on across various countries at the moment. Germany testing the most. Italy's run a lot of tests. South Korea testing a lot. And then we head down into the United States, France, United Kingdom. These are tests per million people. And India at the bottom there. So she's very keen to make sure that there's more testing and that we get a better idea of the statistical situation. And I just wanted to highlight the Oxford study that's been going on. This is the Financial Times, which I think is the only mainstream media outlet that has mentioned this in any detail. And they're saying that the new coronavirus may already have infected far more people in the UK than scientists had previously estimated, perhaps as much as half the population, the FT saying, according to researchers at the University of Oxford. And they're saying that if the results are confirmed, they imply that fewer than 1 in 1,000 of those infected with COVID-19 become ill enough to need hospital treatment. And that was according to Sunetra Gupta, who's the professor of theoretical epidemiology, who is leading this study. Their point is that the vast majority develop very mild symptoms or none at all. And their research suggests that COVID-19 reached the UK by mid-January at the latest, and perhaps as early as December. And they say that it spread invisibly for a month or more before the first transmissions within the UK were officially recorded at the end of February, and that the epidemic started to grow after that. Now, in the meantime, then, we have the Office for National Statistics. And of course, this is our graph based on those statistics showing the total weekly England and Wales deaths, including COVID-19. That's the red line there for this year. And the orange line is the average of the past 5 years. And we can see that up until week 11, in fact, this has been updated now to week 12. So week 12 is bang on the average at the moment. Week 13 will come out tomorrow. But this is their version of the graph. And as you can see at the bottom right there, we start to see COVID-19 statistics appearing. Very few of them, as you can see, relative to the other weekly deaths in any particular week of the year. Well, one of the interesting things that they have stated on their website is this. In the notes, it says quite clearly that a death can be registered with both COVID-19 and influenza or pneumonia mentioned on the death certificate. Therefore, a death may be counted in both categories. Well, this is quite strange, I thought. And my first question that came to mind was, is this something which happens normally, or is it something which is special to COVID-19? So I wrote to the Office for National Statistics to ask them what the situation was there, and they were kind enough to reply. They have said this isn't something that would have always been the case. It's just for the COVID-19 reporting. So David, if we could welcome you to the programme and see what you think about this, because basically what the Office for National Statistics therefore is doing is looking at a death certificate. They are saying that the words COVID-19 or the word COVID-19 is on there. No matter what else is on there, they are allocating that as a COVID-19 death. If people from the Council on Foreign Relations are concerned about the fact that we're not testing affecting the mortality rate, surely this has got to be skewing the death figures as well.
Yes, and it raises so many questions. I mean, for a start, what does the death certificate actually say, and what's it based on? Is it presumed COVID-19, or is it based on testing? Is it simply because the person had some flu-like symptoms, perhaps amongst many other more serious, medical ailments when they died? And then, if it was based on testing, how reliable is the testing? What's it testing for exactly? And what's the false positive rate? And none of this seems to be clear at all.
Well, these are very good points. And in fact, if we head over the Atlantic to the United States, the CDC, according to the Western Journal here, is now telling hospitals in the US to list COVID-19 as the cause of death, even if they're just assuming it or it only contributed. So they're saying that the data that we do have, meanwhile, could end up being terminally skewed. Issued on the 24th of March, the guidance tells hospitals to list COVID-19 as a cause of death, regardless of whether or not there's actually testing to confirm that's the case. Instead, even if the coronavirus was just a contributing factor, or if it's assumed to have caused or contributed to the death, it can be listed as the primary cause. That seems to be what's going on in this country as well, but this is just, where does that leave us?
Well, we absolutely know it's the case, Mike, because so many people from the NHS have been telling us this is what's going on. We've got a scam running. We're going to have a look at how this COVID virus scam is put together a little bit later.
Okay, now Michael Gove gave the live streamed briefing for COVID-19 on Saturday. Boris Johnson still unwell, of course. His main concern seemed to be that people would be flouting the rules over social distancing at the weekend because of the good weather. But here's what he had to say.
I also recognise that we're asking a lot of the British people. And we in government therefore have a responsibility to communicate as clearly as possible. Adapting to this pandemic has meant developing guidance, implementing new policies, and coordinating efforts across government at an unprecedented pace. Inevitably, there has therefore been criticism of some government actions. I recognise that that criticism has been designed to challenge government's performance and to improve our response, which is why I welcome it. Even as we unite in our efforts to defeat the virus, we must also recognise that robust scrutiny is to be welcome. It's the duty of the media, which is why we're acting to both share robust information and support our media by investing more in our government information campaign, which is being disseminated through the national media and local newspapers and radio. And in this united national effort, where we need both constructive challenge and a shared spirit of national endeavour, we want to make sure that we all work collaboratively to help defeat the virus.
So, David, there we had mention of the fusion doctrine. We're working cross-government. We have mention of the fact that they are going to increase their spending on the propaganda campaign, and they don't want the fourth estate to hold them to account. They actually want the fourth estate to work collaboratively with them. So where does that leave us?
Yeah, the fourth estate's allowed to question and scrutinise, but only where they're told to question and scrutinise, only if it's in the direction of travel dictated and outlined by the government. That sort of scrutiny is okay, but that's good scrutiny. If you actually question the narrative, that's bad scrutiny. Then you'll be called someone who is endangering lives. You'll be called reckless. You'll be removed from the government list of friends and probably excluded from press conferences and news briefings and such like. So that seems to be where it's at. It's a usefully controlled media, not a free media. And I love the words guidance policies. We're asking people to do things. We'll see later on some of the ways that we're being asked.
Absolutely. Well, where are they spending their money then? Here we go. The games industry. So the government and the video games industry have joined forces in the fight against coronavirus. The Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport is working with some of the UK's leading games companies to feature the government's clear stay-at-home save lives instruction, the stay-at-home protect the NHS save lives. So they're working with Activision, they're working with Rebellion and a couple of others to make sure that children and teenagers are absolutely getting the message. In the meantime, concerns in the press industry, here's the Press Gazette, concerns that the media is suffering very badly from the current economic situation. And so they've decided it's now or never what advertisers, government, readers and big tech must do to support the news industry. And they're saying that advertisers have got to back and not block trusted news brands, that MPs and government need to make sure that there's money going to these trusted news brands. The big tech companies, Facebook and Google, would be very less interesting places for readers to spend time without the widely shared professional news content which features on their platforms. So they should be supporting it. And readers, of course, have got to be buying this content because it is the best content that you could possibly have. So that's what the industry is saying. But what's Google doing? Well, they have decided that they are going to pump $6.5 million into the fact-checking organisations, and so that includes Full Fact in the UK, $6.5 million in funding to fact-checkers and non-profits fighting misinformation around the world, with an immediate focus on coronavirus. Collaboration again. So there you go. Collaboration is a crucial component of journalism's response to a story as complicated and all-encompassing as COVID-19. For this reason, the Google News Initiative is stepping up its support for First Draft. The non-profit is providing an online resource hub. So that's good. They're also, as I say, Full Fact as well, and Matilda.es in Spain. And in Germany, Corrective will step up its efforts to engage citizens to fight against misinformation. So this is right across the world and the European Union. Spectacular.
I'm not reassured at all, Mike. Let's come in a different direction. One of the things happening for UK Column at the moment is more and more people within the NHS are contacting us and giving us information. This is just a selection of raw comments that have come into us, but I think it's worth putting on screen. So we're being told elderly are not being taken to hospital as ambulances are not attending. Elderly people are being held in care and residential homes, often with no doctors attending except when they come to sign a death certificate. Well, there's money involved in that for them, so that's the reason why. Patients are not being given oxygen by face masks, as this is considered virus spreading risk. So pressure to intubate with sedation to coma is very high, especially for the elderly. And that intubation, that's putting a tube down into your lung, for those that do not need it, will increase the morbidity rate. So we're creating death, particularly in elderly patients, but also in patients with some form of respiratory problems. NHS staff are being brainwashed to believe that COVID-19 is a unique, very dangerous virus. And many of the staff are frightened and confused by events and their work environment. A lot of them talking about very pressurised, poisonous management styles within the NHS.
And we're starting to see that come out in some of these videos that nurses in particular are producing, you know, where they're speaking into their little vlogs where they're really showing that they're under massive stress.
Massive stress, yeah. Some of them coming home crying. We know this is going on. Far from using NHS staff and GPs to frontline a normal winter flu, they've been withdrawn from the battlefield. This has never happened before. Now, the particular person said to me, this is quite incredible. Instead of using your medical staff to get out there and fight what's happening, this is like an army all running away. This is no disrespect to the NHS people because they've been forced into this position. But this was a very big point from the person providing the information. And they also say that if you look at it, sending NHS staff home, which is what was going on early on in the emergency, helped fuel the emergency. And they point out that in Lombardy, Italy, there was a known problem due to the perilous state of medical provision. So that was a special case due to the fact that the medical facilities were collapsing. And this particular individual pointed out to me that Spanish doctors have also warned of problems, including 2,000 bed cuts just prior to the problems with the virus in Spain. And at the bottom, this one's very interesting. Informed NHS staff believe the COVID-19 scare and lockdown will be deliberately dragged out until a COVID-19 vaccination is available. And it's believed that women testing the Gates vaccine must not get pregnant, and protected sex is being advised for male testers of the vaccine. So make what you like of those comments, but that's what we're being given. So let's put things together and see if we can work out what's actually going on. So we've got a graphic here understanding how the government is engineering a COVID crisis. So what we've got is a basic winter flu. And around it, we're putting biased selected statistics to create the false idea that COVID-19 is an especially dangerous winter flu on par with Spanish flu. And you've already shown the graph, Mike, showing that the death rates do not suggest this at all. What have we got? Well, initially, we do nothing to support medical staff in the front line other than close down the GPs. We fail to test the frontline NHS staff, and we fail to provide them with the right protective equipment. We ramp up the fear using erroneous alarmist statistics and inflammatory public statements to create fear of a pandemic in public and in the medical services themselves. We send NHS staff home, thereby weakening the whole national medical structure and creating the illusion of a major national medical problem. We use young, untrained, but, quote, 2-day upskilled NHS staff supported by unknown medical teams and army to deal with what they say are the worst cases. We treat all elderly as dangerous transmitters of disease rather than vulnerable patients. We force them onto intubation and coma, which requires major anaesthesia and sedation, and which ultimately increases morbidity via secondary complications, e.g. lack of movement is a problem when the body's still in bed, or dehydration, for example. We label those elderly patients do not resuscitate. We frustrate the GPs attending private homes and care homes. We drive up the actual deaths alongside inflated COVID-19 causality statistics via hospital tests and death certificate labelling, which we've covered. And then we create a sort of macabre white helmet street theatre of death and fear. And centre to that, we're pretty sure it's going to be that Nightingale 4,000 bed facility, which we understand is going to take intubated patients. So these are all going to be patients in a pretty precarious position, and that will deliver the high profile body count that obviously is going to disturb the public. So people say, but why are they doing this? Well, let's have a look. They're training the public to be compliant. They're installing enabling legislation to deny basic freedoms and rights. They're allowing the banks to flood the UK with loans, thereby creating debt, thereby buying individuals and businesses up. We're bringing in social credit as a control mechanism. We're destroying large parts of the economy at low level, therefore giving the government greater control, the banks greater control, and big business. We are enthusing and employing armies of pandemic public healthers. This is very significant, Mike, because this is exactly what David Cameron said he was going to do in his big society, draw people's armies together. And this, of course, is creating participatory democracy, where it's not the individual that counts, it's groups of people, charities, non-government organisations, for example. And what you're really achieving is to transform the UK society and economy to a Soviet or a communitarian model. We could debate what that is.
Now, just to reinforce what you've said there, the destroy large parts of the economy at low level. One of the questions that Michael Gove was asked on Saturday pointed out that approximately 1 million people had applied for universal credit last week alone. 1 million people.
Yeah.
That is massive. Now, to train the public to be compliant, well, just have a listen to this.
Mr. Gove, everybody watching this will be wondering the same thing. That is how and when this lockdown will end. You said before, understandably, it's too early to say when, but I wondered if you could help us with the how.
On the specific point about when the current restrictions will end, it depends on compliance. One of the points that Neil Ferguson was making earlier today, one of the points that Steve and I have been seeking to make today as well, is that the more effectively that people comply with what we acknowledge are very stringent conditions, the more that we can slow the spread of the disease, the more resilient the NHS can be, the more that we can move to a different phase in due course. But it does rely on people observing that. So there's no fixed point, no specific date in the calendar at which we can say that things will change. We're keeping them under review. The Prime Minister said that the current lockdown proposals will be reviewed in what is just over a week's time. But we need people to comply now.
So, David, comply?
You will comply. And just a small comment on Brian's earlier piece there. I had a nurse contact me from Glasgow, from a care home in Glasgow. She said there was 120 residents, and every single one had a do not resuscitate attached to them. So I was quite surprised by that. Everyone.
Well, David, I'll also add that I've had some discussions with people in the business community over the weekend, and they're obviously extremely concerned what's going on, talking about areas of the business world being devastated already, hardened business people near to tears. But some of those individuals also said to me, we know that the banks are hoovering up businesses, and we know, quote, they're killing off elderly people. And I was really surprised at that comment. There was no prompting to go into that area. I was talking about businesses, and the individual then said to me, what they're doing is killing off elderly people. And I had to agree.
But David, the destruction of the economy, we can't leave out the financial side of things. And well, the United States seems to be going all exponential on money printing.
Well, it does. I mean, this is already a bigger peak than the so-called fix for the subprime crisis. And of course, it's early days yet. How high will this go? Right, so that's already up around the sort of 6 trillion mark. Someone suggested they would stop at 6,666 million, but billion. But I'm not sure. I don't think that's high enough. How high can that possibly go? And what will be the consequences? Because we're dealing here with the potential for destroying the money.
Yeah, I mean, somebody suggested to me a few days ago that we didn't need to worry about the potential inflationary effects of this because, of course, there's no pressure on the demand side. Yeah. If we print money at this sort of rate, there will be inflation. It doesn't matter what the demand side is. The velocity of money is not going to save us. There will be inflation. And of course, once it starts, it can gallop away extremely rapidly. And then, well, you don't have a debt problem anymore because that's liquidated, but so are a lot of other things like pensions and businesses and savings and everyone's security. So, this is what they're playing with. This is what Mr. Gove is playing with. And I thought his phrasing there was very strange. He was talking about, if everyone complies, we might slow the spread of the virus. Well, the spread of the virus already seems to be pretty slow, and compliance seems to be pretty thorough. And he doesn't seem to be recognizing this. There seems to be a disconnect between reality and what Mr. Gove is telling us. Well, speaking of disconnects between reality and what we're being told, let's move to Scotland. Well, what is going on with, in fact, you've lost it. Somebody's had to resign, it seems.
Well, very rare that this in Scotland where someone has to resign, although getting a little more frequent. I mean, we had Derek Mackay for grooming children, and we've had a few others. But it would appear that the Scottish Government decided to stage a little morality play for us all. And it was starring the Chief Medical Officer, Catherine Calderwood, and the Sun, who now seems to be the official opposition in Scotland. They're doing very well. The Sun reported a few days ago that she had taken a little trip with her family. Here we see her out for a walk on the golf course, and she'd gone from her Edinburgh main home to her Earlsferry, East Neuk of Fife seaside holiday home. And this didn't go down awfully well, because of course it's completely contrary to everything that she has personally been instructing the rest of us to do. So the rest of the papers picked up on this. You'll see here the Scotsman, and I think this is the Mail on Sunday, right? The Scotsman, hypocritic oath. Okay, so they're pointing out there's hypocrisy here between what she's saying, and the still you see in the Scotsman photograph is from a government, now withdrawn, government video where Ms. Calderwood was telling us all to stay in our homes. And here the Mail on Sundays here is saying how Chief Medical Officer flouted her own rules during the virus lockdown. So this was obviously playing really badly, and she was getting a great deal of public kickback via Twitter, via email. There was an awful lot of unhappy people making their unhappiness known in very precise, strongly worded, but fairly stated arguments. So she was forced then to come out and make an apology. So this she did. So she said, I wish to apologise unreservedly for the issue reported in the media today. Whilst there are reasons for what I did, they do not justify it, and there were not legitimate reasons to be out of my home. Whilst I and my family followed the guidance on social distancing at all times, I understand that I did not follow the advice I'm giving to others. I'm truly sorry for that. I know how important this advice is, and I do not want my mistake to distract from that. I have a job to do as Chief Medical Officer to provide advice to ministers on the path of this virus and to support the medical profession as they work day and night to save lives. And having spoken with the First Minister this morning, I will continue to focus entirely on that job. So she's talked to the First Minister. There was going to be no resignation, and everything was okay, but she was very sorry. Okay. Now it got even more bizarre because Ian Livingstone, not wanting to be accused of maybe having double standards himself, decided to get ahead of the curve. And you've got to admire his media savvy over this one. And he sent the Rosers round to the Chief Medical Officer, right? And as they said here, earlier today, local officers visited Dr. Catherine Calderwood and spoke to her about her actions, reiterated the crucial advice, her own crucial advice, and issued a warning about her future conduct, all of which she accepted. Okay, so the Rosers have been round, and Ms. Calderwood is very unhappy, is very sorry. But of course, the public weren't being fooled, and the Scottish Twitter was full of this. Here's one example which I particularly liked. It's a photograph of Catherine Calderwood in her jolly multicoloured coat. And she said, I have linked with Visit Scotland to provide ScotVid-19 holidays and breaks. Right now, this is just lovely mockery, and it was showing the position that she was in, which was completely incoherent. Now, to show you how bad it is, we've got a little video here of what she was telling the public.
This is a vital update about coronavirus. To help save lives, stay at home. Anyone can spread coronavirus. Only go out when absolutely necessary for food, medicine, work, or exercise. Always stay 2 meters apart and do not meet others outside your own household, even friends and family. Stay home, protect Scotland's NHS, and save lives.
And you see, someone has modified that slightly. The original is no longer available. It's been withdrawn by the Scottish Government. And so this was it. So they then had a press conference, and it didn't go well. The First Minister decided in the wake of the press conference to slightly give a little bit of ground. She said, I'm acutely aware of the importance of public trust and the advice government is given to stay at home in order to save lives and protect our NHS. To maintain that trust, we were revising our public information campaign, and the Chief Medical Officer will be withdrawing from media briefings for the foreseeable future. She will continue to provide the Scottish Government with scientific and medical advice on the spread of coronavirus. Now, you see what she's doing here? She's treating the Scottish people like we're less than two. We don't have object permanence, and we think if we can't see the Chief Medical Officer no longer exists. So we're having we're being treated like children by the First Minister. That didn't go down tremendously well. The story by this point was going worldwide. It was being reported in the New York Times, and eventually the ridicule and demands from the Scottish public for something to be done became too much for the poor old CMO, and she did eventually resign. And here's the resignation. It says, I'm acutely aware, I beg your pardon. I'm deeply sorry for my actions and mistakes. The First Minister and I have had further discussions this evening, and we agreed that the justifiable focus on my behaviour risks becoming a distraction from the hugely important job the government and the medical profession has to do in getting the country through the coronavirus pandemic. Having worked so hard in the government's response, that is the last thing I want. And so she concludes, it's with a heavy heart that I resign as Chief Medical Officer. So she's gone, and I think we should finish here with the Sun having the final word, because they broke the story. And I have to say, they did this extremely well. So here we see Flout in our ear is the headline, very Sun-like headline. They report, Miss Sturgeon clearly believed that if the Chief Medical Officer survived the ordeal of an on-camera apology, it would all go away. Everybody would forgive and forget, and we could all get on with the business of fighting the bug again. But Sunday's broadcast was far, far worse than car crash television. It wasn't a car crash, not even a train wreck. This press conference was the TV equivalent of a jumbo jet loaded with endangered rhinos, crashing right on an orphanage. Sorry, it's difficult to read this with a straight face. And they continued. We are not permitted even to look at Catherine Calderwood, far less listen to her latest made-up justification. Instead of seeing the Health Secretary and Chief Medical Officer flanking the First Minister, almost every shot was squarely fixed on Nicola Sturgeon, looking right down the camera and repeating, nothing to see here, move along. All it needed was a crowd of eager North Koreans clapping like maniacs every time she opened her mouth, all applauding a safe 2 meters distance apart, of course. So they absolutely have the right handle on this, how ridiculous the Scottish Government managed to make itself look. And I was particularly impressed with one of the commentators who said this. He said, this is Andrew Nicholl, Sunday's Corona press conference with Nicola Sturgeon and the disgraced Chief Medical Officer Catherine Calderwood made only one thing clear to the public: your government has lied to you. And that is spot on.
David, what's not clear to me, though, is she seems to have resigned, but also not resigned, because apparently Nicola Sturgeon this morning was saying that really the advice from this lady was much too important that she couldn't do without it, and so she would still be going to Catherine Calderwood, for advice. So is this some Scottish form of resignation that the rest of us are just not aware of?
Yes, that's exactly what it is, Mike. We saw it with Derek Mackay, who didn't resign and wasn't sacked, but is no longer in his job. And Catherine Calderwood didn't resign and wasn't sacked, but is no longer in her job. Nothing to see here, move along.
David, phenomenal story. Just one comment from me. Why did that lady do what she did? I'm going to suggest that she did what she did. She took her family to the holiday home because she knew that in doing so they weren't at risk. This woman's at the heart of all the government statistics. If she really knew that to step outside her front door was going to place herself or any members of her family at risk from COVID-19, she wouldn't have done it. She did it because she knew that this is a fabricated pandemic. That's my personal opinion.
Well, this is exactly correct, and this is the main point that only some of the media are picking up on. Right, and this is what you learn from, for example, Austrian economics. People's actions define what they actually believe. It defines their value structure. There's no two ways about it that self-preservation comes at the top of that value structure for more or less everybody, and I'm sure Catherine Calderwood. And had she thought there was a risk, she wouldn't have gone.
Yeah.
She doesn't believe what she's telling us.
Yes. Now, David, on last Wednesday's programme, we were highlighting the fact that the Scottish Government was suggesting that juries should be axed because they're just far too dangerous to have juries in court cases under the present circumstances. That didn't seem to last too long.
No, more or less as we reported on it last week, I think it was Wednesday, the backtracking began, and it became Humza Yousaf, the Justice Secretary, started saying, well, we'll consult on it and we'll put the law through, but we'll try not to act on it if we don't absolutely need to. That didn't work either, and there was more backtracking, and then they shelved it. They're saying they're going to come back to this issue in 3 weeks' time and try to push it through again. But it's just another SNP way of backing down without being seen to back down. It met wholehearted resistance across Scotland, across the normally quite limp opposition in Holyrood, and across the legal profession, who were, to be fair to them, wholeheartedly against this and speaking out loudly against it.
Yes. Now, let's have a look at this, because Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron apparently have been discussing the pandemic, and they've decided that convening P5 leaders as soon as possible to increase UN cooperation on defeating the pandemic and ensuring international peace and security is the right thing to do. That's according to a White House statement. So the P5, of course, is the UN Security Council. That's the United States, Russia, China, Britain, and France. And apparently Macron has said that, or his office at least has said that this would be an important signal to the world in face of this global pandemic, and because that poses, the pandemic poses a particular threat in areas of armed conflict. So we need to deal with it now, because you can't fight wars while there's a pandemic going on. People might give the illness to each other on the battlefield. So we've got to deal with it for that reason. But anyway, in the meantime, sticking with the French, a couple of French doctors here were outed over the weekend for really saying that the future vaccine testing should probably best be done in Africa, because we know that coronavirus vaccines have killed all the animals that have been involved in animal testing up until now. So in future, we've got to do it in Africa. So Dr. Jean-Paul Mira said, shouldn't we do this study in Africa where there's no masks, treatments, and so on, as done in AIDS studies where they used prostitutes? And Dr. Camille Loch said, you're right, we're thinking of a study in Africa to use the same approach as the BCG placebos. So there you go, David. We don't need to have any animal testing because we've got Africans to test on.
This is incredible. I mean, I'm actually astonished that they said that. And Africa and AIDS has got some big issues that we will talk about in extra time. But yeah, that was truly horrendous.
Yeah, but you shouldn't be surprised, because we're starting to see the ideology of the people that are bringing in all these things. We're getting to the heart of the beast. No surprise.
The defining people who are the new subhumans and who are expendable.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to Ofcom, David. And well, Ofcom has apparently sanctioned a radio station because of what they describe as a misleading coronavirus interview.
Yes, Ofcom are the new arbiters of truth, and you cannot say anything that they don't approve of. And complete lack of knowledge of subject matter is no barrier to Ofcom. They know the truth, even if they don't know anything about the subject, which is very interesting how they do this. So yes, the report here says, Ofcom's own report says, Ofcom has taken action against a community radio station. So it's a small organisation, community run, after it broadcast a discussion that contained potentially harmful views on the coronavirus. So the views are harmful. So views are now toxic. If you disagree with the narrative, you're harmed, you're killing people, actions going to be taken by Ofcom, the arbiters of all that is right and proper in society, it would seem. I do have a problem with this, though. It seems that Ofcom maybe are not as well read on this as they might be, because I've been starting to look at the 5G issues, and I was just trying to get a handle on whether or not we have something that wants further study. Here's the Lancet. The Lancet's got an article here from December last year, December 2018, planetary electromagnetic pollution it is time to assess the impact. Right, and I'll not go through the full detail here, but they're basically pointing out that the safety case for this was made in the 1990s, and that the amount of electromagnetic radiation associated with information technology has grown hugely since then, and it needs to be re-examined in terms of safety. They go on, they've got a graph here that shows the additional power that is being, power density against the frequency spectrum here, running from background up through 1950s, 1980s and 2010s. So that it shows how much of a difference there is. And they comment, it's been widely claimed that radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, being non-ionizing radiation, does not possess enough photon energy to cause DNA damage. This has now been proven wrong experimentally. So when I'm starting to read stuff like this, I think I would like to see an ongoing discussion about 5G safety. I'd like to see an ongoing discussion about mobile phone safety in general, and see where the testing actually is on this, and whether it's robust enough for the amount of exposure we're now putting our entire society to. And I'm not very keen on Ofcom silencing any discussion on this that they don't think is correct. Who made them arbiters of what needs to be discussed?
Absolutely. Just before Brian comes on his stuff here, David, I just wanted to say again, because we've said it on this program before, I still would like to see some consistency from government, from commentators, from the media on why we need the precautionary principle for climate change. We need the precautionary principle we needed it for smoking, for the smoking ban. We need the precautionary principle for COVID-19. But with respect to 5G, we don't need the precautionary principle because it's just presumed to be safe on the basis of, as the Lancet's saying, on research that was done 20 years ago, when in fact the technology is so completely different. And I have to say, David, one of the things that I'm beginning to get a hint of, that there's an attempt in the mainstream media here to present anybody that's questioning, asking questions about either 5G or coronavirus. They're trying to link those two things together and discredit those questions.
Yes, and the same conspiracy theorist claims and tinfoil hat claims will be made on anyone who asks questions. And they will try and pick on someone who is not very well informed and is asking questions in a crass way to paint the very idea of questioning these things as being ridiculous. And that's not what the science is showing. And that's not what reason is showing. And we shouldn't allow ourselves to be fooled.
Indeed, we shouldn't. We just stick with Ofcom for a moment, because for the last couple of months, UK Column has been taking Ofcom on, because we discovered that when Ofcom's content board members were sitting, content board members, and they were discussing BBC content, that 7 out of 10 of them were actually former BBC people and or drawing BBC pensions. But let's see how this business over the 5G is growing. So BBC News only giving a pro 5G report. There is no counter reporting by the BBC whatsoever, although they are getting hot under the collar, sorry the pun, because people are setting light to 5G masts.
Allegedly.
Okay, allegedly. So basically we've got Ofcom totally biased in favour of the BBC. I'm calling them lovies, but significant people who, some of whom are enjoying BBC pensions, sitting on Ofcom, telling other people what they should be doing. This is the Independent saying that British broadcasters have also been warned by media regulator Ofcom that they face possible sanctions if they give airtime to false health advice about coronavirus. Well, of course, that doesn't include the BBC because, well, here's Ofcom. What we asked them as one of a series of questions: can Ofcom please explain how the Ofcom Content Board meeting was allowed to continue informal deliberation on subjects directly connected to the BBC and its operations when 7 out of 10 Ofcom board members present have declared personal BBC interests or should have declared those interests. And of course, what does Ofcom do? It simply doesn't give a proper response. It sidesteps the reply. So we've got one rule for Ofcom, another for broadcasters, except the BBC. And Ofcom even tried to obfuscate the matter by pushing part of it sideways to a freedom of information request, which I decided to allow them to do because I also wanted to know who people were attending the meeting that Ofcom did not declare. So I said, by all means, push that through freedom of information. And then they came back and said, well, we're not going to release that information either. So Ofcom says it's independent, absolutely not. It's very, very closely aligned with the BBC. And if you ask for proper transparency and accountability, you're not going to find much in Ofcom.
No. Now, David, just before we close, I did want to get your thoughts on the statement by, or the article by Jonathan Sumption, Lord Sumption, ex or former Supreme Court judge and British constitutional expert. We mentioned this on the programme last week, but I wanted to hear what you thought about this.
Well, it's an excellent article, and it's pointing out the fact that although we live in an area where, in a world where we take advice from experts, this does not mean we do not have a valid view ourselves of what is being done to our society, because this is a broad issue, much broader than, say, narrow technical knowledge in the medical field. And he's looking at what's been done and the closing down of the economy, the destruction of lives, the destruction of businesses. And he's asking, is the cure actually worse than the disease? And he's saying basically that we must not be silent about these issues. We must be speaking out. We must be sharing our views and each individual sharing their wisdom about how our society is being run, and that it's not acceptable to silence dissent.
Yes. Okay. Brian.
Well, we're going to end on some formal advice from the government. If you're not sure about the social distancing rules, then this new advice should be very clear. This is 2 meters apart.
Yes. Okay. Now, David, so David, when you stop chuckling there, we are just going to play out with a little piece of music.
Yes, this is from a friend of the UK column, Gillard Atzman. It's a little homage to Britain that he's made his home and he really loves, and it's nice to have a little bit of beauty in the end of reporting on a great deal of madness.
Okay, so we will do that, and we'll be back on Wednesday.
We'll be back on Wednesday, and I'll just say thank you to everybody for all the wonderful support we're getting. If you like what we do, please help spread it, because there's no doubt UK Column is suffering from covert censorship. So if you like what we're doing, you've got to support, and that includes helping to push out the information.
So here's Gilad.
I can do for you is playing one of your favorite tunes, a Nightingale song in Barclays Bank.